Dr. Kaplan, it's an honor to talk to you.
My pleasure to be here with you.
As a student, I've followed you. I've used your work. And today we are talking. We're talking at a time when literally there is a VUCA world. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and there's a lot of ambiguity. What does it take for a leader to survive and thrive in this VUCA world?
Well, there are several attributes that remain important even from the old world to this current world. And we think ethical leadership is very important, to have strong moral values and have the values and communicate that to the organization and make sure that whatever you do, there is this foundation of good behavior and a connection and a commitment to society. With that as a foundation, then you need a leader still to have a vision of where the organization, whether it's a corporation or a state, should be going. Because without that vision and direction, people don't know, how to align themselves to some higher purpose. And again, this is nothing new. The best leaders are the ones who continually challenge and inspire their organizations to be much better, ultimately in serving a customer, whether it's a private sector customer or a consumer or the citizens in the case of a political leader.
Fantastic. You're saying today's integrity, ethics and values have more relevance and need than ever. Since your work is primarily focused on organizations, institutions, and that then creates a leadership framework, so to say, a balanced scorecard, so to say, what are the trends that you see happening over the next 3-5 years? If you had to make some predictions, what would those be?
The biggest trend that we're seeing and the biggest challenge as well as the opportunity is what brought me to India today, which is how can corporations better align with solving some of the societal problems that have proved so intractable. For 50 years or more, people would follow what I'd say is the Milton Friedman approach of business and society, that business's role is to make a profits and be successful, and they can't get distracted doing things which they're not good at and which governments are supposed to do, dealing with education and with health and income growth of the entire population. But what's occurred over these last 50 years, well, first of it, some of it is magnificent, where billions of people have been lifted out of poverty. And it's really been quite extraordinary, and I attribute much of that to the success of the capitalistic enterprise. We ran a contest for 40 or 50 years between socialism and capitalism. In the late 1980s, early 1990s, capitalism won. And China, India, they abandoned the socialistic tendencies, and there was tremendous growth for those countries and for the rest of the world. But we can look back now, and we can see this occurring, that over the last 5 or 10 years, more aware that many people were still left behind. And in the United States, the globalization and the growth actually made quite a few people worse off. And you can't understand the 2016 elections in the United States without recognizing that as a reaction against the globalization, which left significant numbers of people behind.
The inequality.
Yeah, the inequality and the growth, and this is will be devastating to market-based capitalism if it persists, because if populist leaders come in, what happens is those people have votes in democracies, and if they see that they cannot participate in this growth, they're being left behind, they will elect leaders who promise to transfer wealth to them and make them better off. And this will not be good either for corporations or for the growth. It's unfortunately what happened in Venezuela and is causing an impoverishment of that entire country. So that's the warning, and the Trump election is also kind of a warning sign, and the Brexit vote in the UK of that. Now, fortunately, in Western Europe, it got reversed a little bit. So what does this have to do with corporations is the populism coming in is actually not going to be good for corporations. And so corporations have to be engaged with civil society and try to use their engine for growth and prosperity to address the people who had been left behind. And that's what we have talked about today in my day in India, is how corporations should not view this as corporate social responsibility, something that's imposed on them. It's actually something that is in their best long-term interest.
It should be intertwined with the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be embedded in the strategy, not parked on the side as something that their CSR office does. And we're starting to see examples of where this works really marvelously well, where corporations can engage. But you asked me about the biggest challenge. I think this is the biggest challenge because corporations have not seen this as one of their primary mission.
Because the leaders are arrogant, or because somewhere in the pursuit of profit, everything else has become secondary.
Yes, I mean, they saw that their role is to deliver shareholder value, that was their primary constituency. And I actually will still tend to believe that, but if you want to sustain, growth and profits for your shareholders over the long term, they're going to have to be engaged in civil society and playing a role to reduce poverty and inequality.
And possibly go after the triple bottom line.
Exactly, and clearly a lot of corporate profits took the environment as free, and we didn't have to pay for pollution of the water or the atmosphere or landfills. But that's coming to an end. I mean, the environment has become far more fragile, and it cannot be taken for free. And they have to think about the policies so that as they grow, they can grow in a sustainable way and not deteriorate the living conditions, which people will find intolerant at some point. So it's a much broader perspective in the pursuit of profit.
Fantastic. You said you've done more than 15 trips to India. This trip is after 5 years.
Yeah.
You were in India 5 years back when you were the Guru of the Year, Management Guru of the Year at a prominent awards function.
Yeah.
What is your impression of India? Are we keeping pace with what's happening in the world? Are we leading it? What is the ground that we need to cover?
Okay. Well, first, I mean, one of the differences is you can finally see that India is getting some infrastructure. So far here that long on this trip, but I can see kind of the new airports and the new highways. And so I think the huge deficit that India had on infrastructure relative to other developing nations is starting to get closed, and that's good. And I suppose the other big opportunity that's come in is with the election of Prime Minister Modi, who is a business-friendly and growth-oriented prime minister.
Development, and he epitomizes this balanced growth.
Yes.
This, doing great is doing good business.
Yeah.
That's the kind of approach he epitomizes.
And so my message to the corporations here today is you have the window is open for you to grow as businesses, but you'll have to grow in ways that are sustainable and demonstrate that by having growth and increased profits of corporations, more and more citizens are being lifted out of poverty. And that's going to require you to think more broadly about the businesses you're in and how you serve markets. But the exciting thing is that the window is open. And I said, if you don't take advantage of it now and go through that window, 500 million or 1 billion citizens are still being left behind. You're going to go back to a populist, socialist type of government, which you're not going to like.
Absolutely.
And the people 10 or 20 years later are going to look at you and say, why were you sleeping during this time? Why didn't you take advantage of this opportunity? So India presently has a very good political leadership, I think, that should provide the platform for this innovation, trying to attack problems in the environment, but also lifting more and more tens of millions of people out of poverty.
Fantastic. Since you talk of India, and I'm sure you're fascinated by India, how we thrive with our unique set of advantages and challenges. But give me a country that fascinates you currently and why.
Well, actually, some of the countries in the Middle East, in the GCC, are fascinating because unlike India or the United States, these are not democracies. And sometimes we think that only democracies can promote economic growth and capitalism. But what we see there are actually, if you have leaders who are trying to do good things for their people. And we saw this a long time ago in Singapore, where they did not have a democracy, but they had a prime minister who focused on growth and felt and invested in education and invested in public health and providing a friendly climate for businesses to locate. And it's been fantastic. And so, Sheikh Mohammed in Dubai, and now the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This is really a fascinating experiment because he's trying to take Saudi Arabia from somewhere in the early 20th century into the 21st century. I mean, just a huge change in a relatively short period of time. And he's moving obviously very aggressively in this, but he's trying to diversify the economy, but also get many more of the Saudi young people engaged in a productive economy rather than living off the royalties from sales of oil.
Aramco is preparing for an IPO and using that money to put into non-oil businesses.
Right. This was Sheikh Mohammed in Dubai, whose oil and gas fields ran out faster than the other Emirates or Saudi, and so he looked ahead to try to make Dubai a 21st century enterprise there, and then because of that, then Abu Dhabi says, well, we can't let Dubai get ahead, so now we get a healthy competition between them, which is just going to make that region better off. Now, the number of people in those countries are hundreds of thousands or maybe 1 million or 2. India, clearly with 1 billion people, is a massive more challenge to accomplish some type of transformation.
How do you see India versus China?
India is messier. Because of the democracy. So China is able to make decisions quickly and centrally, and so they can build highways and they can build railroads, and they can allow corporations to do. In India, going through the democratic process, multiple parties, things have to go slowly. But India, in a way, is more vibrant and creative. But India, as you see it simplistically, has been quite strong on the services, particularly IT services. China's been very strong.
Our GDP is 2/3 from services now.
Yeah, and China's been very, very strong in manufacturing. And manufacturing is a powerful lever because you can achieve productivity faster in manufacturing than services. So I hope that as you get more, I think you need good infrastructure for manufacturing because you got to get materials in, get it to factories, get the next products out. So perhaps as the infrastructure in India improves, it will become a better base for manufacturing and not just the services. So, they're contrasts. Obviously, they're very different countries, so it is interesting to see the different paths they follow and some things that each of them does better than the other and the opportunities for learning.
I want to ask you, you've seen organizations over the last 40 plus years, right? If you had to predict again, what would be the unique characteristics of an organization of the future, leadership of the future? How do you create that balanced scorecard going forward? How do you create that organization of the future?
Well, I actually do think that what made organizations great over the last 30 or 40 years will continue to make them great. And I just finished up a teaching assignment at Harvard Business School to a senior executive program, and we're looking at all these interesting case studies. We studied Haier, a great appliance company coming out of China. We looked at Henkel, which is a consumer goods company, but a leader came in and he transformed that company. But what they had is, again, strong commitment to the values and ethical conditions, strong performance, very different performance management systems, but very strong accountability for delivering performance among their executives. So setting stretch targets, I say stretch targets that are achievable, not impossible, but challenging, and rewarding very strongly those people who are able to accomplish that. And I think those are all foundation. I mean, I do think that the measurements are important to support the transformation. I suppose both of them, they said, this gets back to the first book of Jim Collins.
Great to good. Great to good.
No, it's even before that. It was, again, built to last.
Built to last, that's
His
right.
first book.
First
And he
book
said
was-
the companies that were built to last, the leaders continually challenge the organization to hit big, hairy, audacious goals. And I think, you know, the leaders are the ones who will set those big, hairy, audacious goals. We had an example of someone who was elected governor to a province in South Korea. And this is the worst performing province in South Korea. It was there, Mississippi or West Virginia from the United States. And he says, elect me and we'll do better, make it great. And he got elected, but unlike most politicians, he really meant it. You know, and he put in a balanced scorecard with stretch targets. And at first, the various ministries, you know, they were resenting it, not doing it. But he stayed the course. No, we have to deliver better results to our citizens. And in 4 years, the next 4 years, they had the highest economic growth rate in all of South Korea, and the highest growth rate in exports, and the highest rate of new job creation. You know, how did he do that? You know, it's the same province, you know, the same geography, the same hills and
Same
valleys, same people. What was the difference? One person who set leadership and measurable and ambitious targets that he held people accountable for achieving.
Do you believe leadership can make a huge difference?
Yeah, no.
My last two questions to you. One, is social media a threat to democracy? And is technology in some way creating the organizations of the future? They're both intertwined.
Well, on the second point first, I mean, the technology certainly reduces the minimum scale of an organization. So before we had this technology, you had to have these, you know, the big organizations in hierarchies. And technology has enabled you to flatten organizations because it enables you to conduct transactions in the marketplace much easier and inexpensively. And so part of it, and many companies are doing this, is becoming much more networked to suppliers and partners without having them inside the organizations. So there's much more fluidity, but then getting back to one of the themes of my appearance here today, there's much more collaboration.
Technology is creating that.
Because you have all that, but now the challenge is, as we're doing all this collaboration, how do you make sure we're all collaborating to go in the same direction? So that's good. The social media is an interesting dynamic, and I think just thinking about it from the corporation, it enables you to hear from your employees a lot faster. And you may not always like what you hear, but before, if they could be unhappy and demoralized, and you wouldn't realize it. But now, through the social media, all of a sudden, you know, they have a little site. I hate my website. I hate my company. Hashtag. You know, and all of a sudden they're forming almost an insurrectional group inside the company. So I think the leaders have to be much more alert to what's happening in the organization, because the social media gives them an ability to organize and protest when things are not going well. So it's an additional challenge. But on the other hand, again,
It's a listening tool.
It's an opportunity because it enables you to reach those people much easier if you can get on top of it. So, you know, part of the new leadership is going to have to be much more technologically literate, both to understand the opportunities from that.
Fantastic. As I said, my last question. You know, we're talking about organizations, we're talking about doing good, and it's in the context of large corporates adopting communities and making sure those communities do well. What should be your advice to political leaders? What should, for example, the current crop of political leaders tend to be very self-centered, use false propaganda? I'm not saying all of them, but some of them, and are dangerous, to put it mildly, because they're creating division. They're playing on the insecurities of the haves and the have-not. So what is your advice to those leaders and to the organization leaders not to learn those behaviors from them?
Yeah, so I mean, you're describing the populist leader who's appearing to the basic fears and concerns of the people who have been disenfranchised by the growth. So the message I had, and it's a new message, it's a new framework that we've come up with, is that the corporations shouldn't just be adopting communities as kind of welfare cases that will take care of them. They have to find ways to productively employ the people in those communities in their supply chain or as employees for their companies or as potential customers for their products. And that means collaborating with leaders in those communities where they are established and working. And I think the way to do this is not to bang your head against the wall with the kind of leader you described, but especially in a country as huge as India.
Luckily, we have a good leader. Luckily, we have
you have a great leader at the top, but the work really has to go on inside the states and the localities. And so look in, where are the states which have good leaders, and where are the communities within those states? And those are your opportunities to build new ecosystems where you're not just giving welfare, in the quotes when you said adopted a community. No, we're finding ways of bringing the employees into our value chain, the citizens into us. Either we're going to hire them and spend a year giving them basic skills, which they didn't get because of failing public schools. We may have to provide them with some health care, so that they're healthy in their family. We're going to encourage some of them to be entrepreneurs and become suppliers to us. We'll commit to purchasing a certain amount of our inputs from new ventures, entrepreneurs in the communities where we operate. So integrating them in our supply chain, integrating them in our talent chain, and thinking about, how do our products and services make them better off? And so that's this new ecosystem going through, and it's going to involve not just corporations, but NGOs and municipalities or states to really make sure we have this very productive ecosystem. And I gave some examples where we've seen this occur in Uganda, of taking farmers out of poverty and making them suppliers of high-quality produce for agribusinesses. Unemployed youth and young adults in El Salvador, get them off the streets and out of gangs and make them productive employees at Walmarts and Hiltons and service companies. So we can see that this can be done, and we have to learn from those examples to create these new and very productive value-creating ecosystems. The corporation at the end has to be there, because only the corporation can scale up, create profits, create productivity, but do it in collaboration in these communities and with certainly the support and encouragement of a positively inclined national government such as you had in India. And that's what I said. When I said the window's open, I said it's up to you now to start to be engaged.
And our Prime Minister is working on inclusive growth. He's making massive changes which are seismic. But eventually those changes will build a new India. Yeah. So I am very, very personally, very, very hopeful from what will come out of the changes that he's made.
And I think those two words are extremely important, and I've adopted them. In fact, that's the title of our forthcoming Harvard Business Review article on inclusive growth. And I like it much better than corporate social responsibility. It sounds like a tax and a duty, or even shared value, because I'm not sure what that means, value. But when we say inclusive growth, it means we need the growth. Economic growth is the best anti-poverty program ever invented. And growth comes from corporations. It doesn't come from nonprofits, and it doesn't come from governments. It comes from kind of the corporate model operating under capitalism. But unlike the growth that we've had over the last 200 years, it's going to have to include everybody. And it's going to have to include the environment.
Since business leaders come from B schools, also from business schools, from the MBA schools, I want to ask you, in India there is lack of social impact curricula in B school education. Is that the case in the US too? And do we need to change it? And if yes, how?
Well, I'm sure it's quite true in many US business schools. I think at Harvard Business School, we do re-examine our role. 10 years ago, at the 100th anniversary of the Harvard Business School, we surveyed our alumni who have been leaders around the world. And the message that came back are the challenges to capitalism that you and I have just been talking about during this interview. So we've tried to change our curriculum and talk about ethical leadership and moral leadership. But we're also beginning, one of my colleagues who wrote the paper with me teaches a course called Reimagining Capitalism. and it covers exactly these points. Now, it's an elective course, but 200 to 300 of our MBA students take that course. And so by creating these new courses, of course, we're creating the cases. And those become available for the Indian business schools and the other U.S. business schools to teach. So we're trying to do our part, not just within ourselves, but to create content where these ideas do come out. And now at that stage, it's going to be up to the faculty in the business schools in India, the U.S., and Europe to put in the courses that talk about, reimagining capitalism in this 21st century for inclusive growth, that is protective of the environment and is more dealing with relieving and alleviating the inequality that's occurred as some people grew a lot and they were left behind.
Fantastic, Dr. Kaplan. It's been an honor and privilege to talk to you.